that initially did because, and you can listen to the podcast made by the dudes that coined the term for more information, but it used to describe a very specific type of pop and soft rock from the 70s. But now if you turn on like the XM station, you'll probably hear a Jimmy Buffett song in there, which is just, as much as I'm a parrot head, he doesn't really belong with Kenny Loggins and Sneaker and Bugatti and Musker and all those dudes.
There's a reason he was a joke in the series.
But the term West Coast is just a little bit more pure because it hasn't really been picked up by lame morning DJs. And I think as far as the genre goes, it was actually first coined by Europeans and Asians. More of a liking to that really polished studio session music of the time. That whole wave of revival predated the stateside one.
They had the whole city pop movement going and all that.
Oh, in Japan?
Yeah, which was just a funkier adaptation of a lot of that kind of music. From what I understand, I need to get more into it.
So do I, but on that note, I know we're talking different country here, but I have a friend who's really into K-pop, and I never really bit into that too much, but he had me listen to a couple of songs, and even in that, you can actually hear the influence of this hyper-produced adult contemporary stuff. So I think that influence had a little bit more lasting effect over there than it did here. And even, I guess I would call AOR sort of a contemporary of yacht rock. They sometimes bump up against each other, and AOR had a much bigger appeal over in Europe than it did stateside, and was also embraced way more by the metalhead crowd over there, strangely, because, and I think I've sent you images, like, you'll see festivals over there where it's, I don't know, Anvil and Raven and Foreigner, and they don't really think anything of it.
That even bleeds into their modern festivals, because you'll still see a metal fest where Europe is the headliner or something like that.
Europe did have a change in sound later on, but not really in a more metal direction. They just sound more Night Flight Orchestra-ish. They're kind of a prime example of that trend as well. A really good example of the two divorced dad subgenres bumping into each other, because they definitely have some yacht influence and a lot of AOR influence. But anyway, I feel like we're talking about everything but Sneaker.
Which is a shame. This was a really good album. As far as I was concerned, it was a perfect half step between Steely Dan and Ambrosia, and I love both those things, so I was all about it.
Just to throw like a third influence in there, early Toto, the St. George and the Dragon period, before they really got, they were always nerds, but before they got really commercial, that post-Michael Jackson boom.
Before Rosanna and all that was coming out.
They're also, and maybe this is why they haven't really been like picked up by the yacht rock crowd so much as their self-contained outfit. I don't know if these guys were big studio heads. I don't recognize a lot of their names from that scene, but I could be wrong. But a lot of those bands that don't really have those connections to those studio guys, I think, are forgotten about by yacht rock purists, because you don't really see a lot of love for Sneaker. And same with Ambrosia for one, and also Pablo Cruz, who were, I think, really one of the yachtier groups out there once they like really started getting some commercial play, just in overall sound. But you don't really hear much about them because they didn't really have these legendary percussionists and synth guys and horn sections coming in. They were just this self-contained unit.
Didn't have Michael McDonald on backing vocals.
Or a fake Michael McDonald. This is getting off track, but you're familiar with Bill Champlin, right?
Yeah, he was in Chicago for a good while.
On his solo work, he often has this group credited on backing vocals called the Champettes, and it's just him. His solo work is really good. We'll have to talk about that someday.
I wouldn't mind checking it out. That era of Chicago is not my thing, really, but I'm sure he's really good.
That makes me all the more curious to bring you on board the Champ train. So I know, again, we haven't really talked about Sneaker much here, but if you've been following the last 10 minutes of this conversation, it's meant anything to you, you'll like Sneaker. I don't really think there's anything else to say about them.
It might not be the best yacht or yacht-adjacent music you'll ever hear, but it's going to be really good. You'll still like it.
All right, what do you want to talk about next?
Let's see here. You know what, let's go with something a little different. We'll do Electronic's debut. So, this is Electronic by Electronic. 1991 debut from a synth-pop supergroup of sorts, featuring Bernie from New Order, Johnny Marr from The Smiths, and it's got some guest spots by both members of the Pet Shop Boys. From all of that, you probably imagine you're going to get some really good synth-pop out of this, and yeah, you will. I was originally going to do New Order, but they're still active, and people still love New Order. Electronic doesn't seem to get brought up near as much anymore, which is a shame, because there's some real bangers on this album, and a couple of the softer tracks will really stick with you. But do you have any prior experience with these dudes?
I had no idea this band existed, which is crazy, but it does go to show that there are a lot more supergroups out there than I think people are aware of. That might be a good episode in and of itself, is forgotten supergroups, but I had never heard of them before. I didn't know what I was listening to. too. It's funny you mentioned the Pet Shop Boys, because I was like, that sounds like the guy from West End Girls. Who is this? I looked it up and I saw the membership list. I was like, oh, this is everybody. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's of its time, I guess I'd say. Not in a bad way, but it definitely sounds like that late 80s, early 90s electronic music. It has a little bit of like and I can't think of any specific songs or anything, but an early 80s almost hip-hop influence. I like the synth part and the drum machine. It just reminded me a lot of R&B. It was interesting to hear those guys kind of take on that. Although the New Order was around for so long that I think they were probably one of the primary influences for that music.
I would say you're pretty on the ball there, because I think the last track is pretty much rapping from Bernie.
I'm glad you said that, because I thought I had maybe imagined that in my early morning stupor. But yeah, there is a hip-hop sort of, proto isn't the word, that's sort of, white guy rapping that older guys were doing in the late 80s and early 90s. It usually doesn't really hold up.
Better than a Killing Joke's attempt did.
A little better than Rush's, too. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Roll the Bones.
Oh, I haven't heard it yet, but I'm afraid.
It's not as bad as you're expecting, but it's not as good as you'd hope.
I guess on that note, even Neil from Pet Shop Boys, West End Girls is more or less kind of a hip-hop song on its own regard. It's just a very spoken kind of vocal tone, except for the choruses. Very flow-based. These guys obviously had a respect for the emerging art and took it and ran with it, which... credit to them for doing that.
Did I ever tell you about the music teacher I had in middle school that said that Nine Inch Nails were the first rap band?
The fact that I'm not completely flabbergasted means I must have heard that before.
Which just the hoops you have to jump through to get to that conclusion, because you have to think that hip-hop didn't exist until 1989, that industrial and hip-hop are the same thing, and you have to think that any music that's not played on an instrument is automatically hip-hop.
Oh, that's bad. That's just dumbfounding. I remember, tied back to the last episode as well, I remember watching an interview with Phil Collins where he was talking about how when Genesis put out Mama, the laughing part in that was inspired by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, which one of the foundational hip-hop bands.
Right. But just to ease everybody's mind out there, after she said that, this white dude from Dundalk, Maryland, that was dressed in entirely a South Pole jumpsuit, jumped up and screamed at her about Sugar Hill Gang. Maybe not the best cultural ambassador, but he got the job done.
At least somebody was there to set it straight.
I guess I don't really have a whole lot else to say about electronic. I think that being a supergroup that isn't completely off base from what any of the dudes were doing, again, those names mean something to you. I don't think you're going to come away from this album disappointed.
I'd agree. I guess then, what are you feeling next?
Let's talk about Ashbury, and this is their album Endless Skies. This is another recent find for me. Every time I ask for recommendations on the page, somebody always completely knocks out of the park. I asked, is there any Southern metal that doesn't suck? And I just want to clarify, just for any listeners from below the Mason-Dixon there, I'm not talking about metal from the South, although some people thought I was. I'm talking about the actual genre of Southern metal, because I'm a huge Southern rock guy. We have an episode planned about that in the near future. And it hurts me so much that the jump between Southern rock and Southern metal is just from gold to trash. So much of it is just garbage. Texas Hippie Coalition, it's just, oh god, it's awful. There's like one exception I can think of, and the only reason I like them, I can't think of what their name is right now, but they're from Denmark or something. Just being completely alienated from the culture. They're so stupid that it's actually good. But I don't really have any love for the American acts. But anyway, other than the people that are just naming bands from the South, and the people that were just naming sludge bands, which, whatever.
You're down corrosion conformity and all that.
Which also pisses me off. It's one of my biggest pet peeves is when somebody's like, hey, can I get some music recommendations? And somebody's like, Metallica. So you really think they don't know Metallica? Come on. And see, people that do that is why, for instance, I'm in this music group on Facebook that's just called Obscure Outsider Music, and somebody will post the Shags every day. Maybe we'll talk about them someday, but it's the most basic outsider music you can think of. And like every time somebody posts it or something on that level, a Jan Terry song or Wesley Willis, and is, oh, look what I just found. There's always this, God bless them, this group of ESL guys from South America and Europe that are just calling them a retard and scaring them out of the group. You have to do that because people don't understand. I don't really get it, because if I'm going to give somebody a recommendation or if I'm going to contribute to a forum, and maybe this is more of a reflection on me than other people, but I'm going to check to see, does this band that I'm about to recommend people check out for the first time, or that I think that no one's ever heard of, have an extensive Wikipedia article about them detailing every element of their career? Because if the answer is yes, then chances are people have heard of them before. And that's why you shouldn't recommend people listen to Pink Floyd. Dig a little deeper.
What was your one the other day? How do you think you're really contributing when you join an obscure prog page and ask if anybody's heard Porcupine Tree. They've been in AV Club articles.
And I know that's hard for some people because they only listen to 12 bands that they found out about in 8th grade and they don't ever evolve past that. But I don't think any of those people will be listening to this show. And I'm sure other people out there that are listening to this show that are huge music nerds can appreciate my gripes. What were we talking about?
Ashbury.
Oh, yeah, that post. So among all that, people asked me if I ever heard of Crowbar and me banning them from the page. Somebody was like, hey, you should check out Ashbury. And I did. And I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. I've never heard this before. This is awesome. It's Southern rock mixed with power metal. All these songs about wizards and prophets and dragons. I don't know if there's literally a song about dragons, but there definitely is wizards and prophets. And it's from when did this album come out?
I want to say it was 82 it came out.
Yeah, 82.
All right, good. Memory still works.
It's after the Southern rock boom, but also before, maybe not. I don't know. I don't really know how big new wave of British heavy metal was in the States in 81, 82. But I feel like it's part of that magical window of music before metal really defined itself and the sound started to be more streamlined. There's a lot of really weird albums from like 1978 and 1979. I have an old show list from the old show that we never got to that was called Lost in 1979. And it was just all these really out there weird metal that predate the new wave of British heavy metal boom, mostly from the States. That'd be a fun thing to revisit. And this kind of reminded me of those records. What did you think of this one?
I was pretty taken with it. The Southern rock was the element that stuck out most to me. A special note I made was on the instrumental, because that thing was damn good. But all the songs, it's not the heaviest stuff you're going to hear by far. It came out in 1982. But, it rocks pretty well. And the singer reminded me a bit of Ian Anderson somehow. That same kind of level. So the whole time I was thinking, sounds like if Jethro Tull's heavier stuff was from the South instead of England. Maybe it's not a fair comparison, but it's what I had in mind.
If you're into the Southern rock or you're into lost power metal classics, US power metal, gotta specify because it's a whole different ball game. Check this one out. It's a weird one, and it has been reissued by High Roller. They're a great company. They do a lot of really nice reissues of forgotten stuff. I think are they the ones that did Legend? I think they reissued the Legend record a while back. Conversation for another day. Let's move on to your next one.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. I think I got 2 left now, if I'm not mistaken. Let me line up what we got here. I'll save the really fun one for last, I think, so let's go with a personal favorite of mine, Brighter Than a Thousand Suns by Killing Joke.
Alright, take it away.
Brighter Than a Thousand Suns, Killing Joke, that was their 1986 album, immediately following Nighttime, which is still pretty widely regarded as their best. I'd be hard-pressed to disagree with that, but Brighter Than a Thousand Suns is probably my favorite in a way. One thing that anybody who's listened to Killing Joke already knows, and that anybody who is going to try to get into them should know, is this band did not believe in keeping one consistent sound. Their variance album to album is about as big as certain bands have in their entire career, and I don't even feel like I'm exaggerating by saying that. This album was somewhere in the midst of them going from their original post-punk roots to a more poppy sound, which then imploded and they embraced industrial metal. But this one had a bit of a goth tinge that none of their other albums have. Very apocalyptic lyrics, gloomy music, just all the kind of stuff I love. Always fun to revisit this one. I probably listen to at least a couple tracks from it every couple weeks, so didn't have to do a lot of refreshing, but it's a long-time favorite of mine, and really good if you want some post-punk that's on the more poppy songwriting end, but very much in a goth kind of attitude. That's my take on it. What'd you think?
I liked it. I'm not a big Killing Joke guy. I've been meaning to get into them and do a run-through, basically since we saw them in concert together, which is, Christ, probably almost a decade ago now, but I haven't gotten to it, and I think the variety is what's kept me away from them. I have a similar problem with KMFDM, who also does wild genre shifts from album to album, because if a band has a consistent sound, you can throw on their best record. I'm not going to say that you understand the band, but at least you have an idea. Okay, this is what this band sounds like. And I've just known from the jump that Killing Joke isn't really that band. So it's just I know that I'm going to have to dedicate time to them, and maybe this podcast will present the opportunity to do so at some point. I know you'd like that. And based on this album, I would too. I got to say, and this is pretty basic of me, but I am mainly familiar with them with Love Like Blood. I don't know where that falls in the timeline, but that also has like a poppy goth influence sound.
That was from the album immediately before this one. Actually, that album would be an excellent follow-up.
Okay, so that makes sense then. It caught me in a good moment just because I've been on a bit of a post-punk kick here lately. I've been listening to Soul Mining a lot, which I don't know if you've listened to all the way through or not, but I love that album so much. They were nice sister listens for me. Do you want to say anything else?
No, I think I said my bit. Just, obviously, you check this one out. You're not going to get the whole story with the band, but you're going to get one of my favorite things. If you take my opinions into any sort of high consideration, give it a whirl.
Let's see. Both of my next ones are depressing their own way. I guess let's go with the one with the more depressing background. Let's talk about Bruce Haack, the Electric Lucifer. Bruce Haack, speaking of outsider musicians, he was a musician that came up in the music concrete scene in the 1950s. He had gotten, I believe, just a